Welcome to the Betoota Advocate radio show. You're joined by myself, Clancy Overall, and Wendell Hussey, the Eternal Cadet. Nearly 10 years as a cadet.
Yeah, you keep dangling that carrot, Clancy. It always just seems to be just around the corner. I've asked my old man, who's obviously close personal friends with you, to sort something out, and he reckons he's trying.
Well, that's where you went wrong, mate.
Yeah, I think he thinks I'm learning a lesson or something. I don't know, but
frustrating. Yeah, well, you're getting a start here today. We're interviewing the New South Wales Premier. Now, I've never interviewed this man per se, but you actually have on one of the Decode podcasts.
Yep. Yeah, spoke to him a little while ago. It was a good, interesting chat. It was a bit of fun as well.
I've never interviewed a Premier. I've only interviewed a Deputy Premier of New South Wales in the shape of John Barilaro, valet. And
yeah, we've deleted that one.
Yeah.
Really?
Nah. I mean, he was a good character. It was a bit of fun, but he was bullshitting most of the time, which I think he did throughout a lot of his career.
I remember you telling me about you interviewing or spending the weekend with Barnaby.
We did a big weekend with Barnaby in Tamworth, which was a hoot. We also did a weekend in Mount Isa with both Catters.
Oh, really?
We stayed in Robbie's house,
yeah,
and Bob showed us around. You know, that rural hospitality rings true, whether it's in Tamworth or Mount Isa.
But there was a whole bunch of Barnaby stories that I don't think you aired.
No, we...
From a journalistic perspective is...
Well, you got to build trust with these. You got to build trust, you know, particularly when we're considered, you know, carpetbaggers coming from Queensland down to New South Wales.
Well, that's what he did. He was a Queenslander, and wasn't he in the Senate in Queensland?
He was, and he was a bouncer in Dirranbandi, which he's mentioned a few times.
Has that been fact checked?
I don't know. I don't know if. Look, he's a big bloke, but I don't know if there was a Dirranbandi ringer playing up in the front bar. Barnaby would be the one I'd bring in to stop what was happening.
If I was playing up in the front bar, I don't know.
Oh, you back yourself against
Barnaby? I'm not saying I'm anything like a Dirranbandi ringer. I'm just more talking about.
You're just
Barnaby.
saying you don't want to be ableist, but you don't think Barnaby could restrain you if he had to.
No. I think like there are certain types of work for certain people, and I don't think. I mean, the fact that it's a hands-on job, obviously, I don't think that's for him. But just size-wise, I also don't think he would.
I don't think he's done jiu-jitsu or he'd have that roadhouse kind of. But he wouldn't stop.
No.
Yeah, true. Do you know what I mean?
Until he was on the
like,
floor out front of the pub, he wouldn't.
You guys would restrain. You'd be like, well, getting too heated, and Barnaby would be like. Yeah. We're not going to end.
Had a big night of minesweeping, cleaning up empty glasses throughout the pub as he crawls through.
So he'd be like Quicksilver, like you just couldn't escape him. It'd be like the Terminator.
Yeah. You have to.
Yeah, he'd just keep rolling.
Yeah.
Who do you think in the New South Wales Parliament is the closest thing to a real bushy? Because I know, unfortunately, rural Australians end up getting represented by these creeps that come out of the city and relocate to their grandparents' hometown at 32 years old with a wife and kid that they've managed to create in the space of 18 months.
Yeah.
Who is a real bushy in New South Wales Parliament?
Who'd be a real bushy? Roy Butler. Do you know Roy Butler? I reckon he's pretty good.
Yeah.
He's an indie outside of Dubbo, but he represents all the way to Broken Hill and around there. But he's vegetarian.
Really?
So he's a former member of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party, and he's a vegetarian.
He's a veggie, and he's quite strict about it too. But I think that adds to his credibility almost.
That is. He's a contrarian by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
I'd love to see him meeting with his constituents who literally farm cattle for a living.
He'd have to be pretty honest out that way.
I mean, also the thing about those kind of vegetarians is. Like the alpha male vegetarian has to make it a thing. Like
no, you know who it's Helen Dalton. Helen Dalton. She's the biggest bushy. Yep, absolutely. So the Nats tried to recruit her, and they said, "We'll give you a Roll Gold run in, and you can have our pre-selection. We won't do it." And she just told them to go jump, and then she ran as an independent, and she won. Yeah. Like she gives us a massively hard time, but
it's happening more and more. Now, you are obviously the Premier of NSW, which stands for Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. What are your feelings about, the regions? I know that Tree change has been a big thing for people ever since the pandemic, really. It probably started a bit before that when the housing crisis became very evident in about 2017. What are your feelings? Like, some of these towns are beautiful, right? You've got rivers running through them, you've got all this foliage, but you've also got one base hospital for, an area the size of Belgium and a 69-year-old doctor who's the only person who knows how to deliver a baby. What are we going to do about the regions?
Well, a few things. I mean, firstly, so much of the state's wealth is driven by regional New South Wales, whether it's agriculture or mining or even as we're moving into critical minerals. Like, they're at the epicentre of that growth. As a result of that, I don't think a lot of people in Sydney, and I've only ever lived in Sydney. My electorate's in Sydney, so I have to do a lot of travel to get into the regions to completely understand what's happening. 1 in 3 people don't live in Sydney in New South Wales. So what we need to do is make sure that they continue to grow, which is not as hard as you think, because there's so many entrepreneurial people that want to start businesses that are prepared to put their own capital in. And then B, make sure that we can put the infrastructure in place so that you can raise a family in regional New South Wales and you get a good education, and that you've got access to health services. The health part of it's the hardest bit, primarily because...
You'd say that's the hardest bit about services in the bush.
It is, and the main reason for that is you're seeing a real centralisation or specialisation in health services, particularly as they get better and better. So it might be, automated robots that are doing keyhole surgeries that, cost a lot of money, and you can roll them out to base hospitals, but it's difficult to do under the old model, which was basically you replicate every service in every part of the state, but just less of it. So in St George Hospital in the middle of Cogra, we would have, say 20 doctors or something in the ICU in the emergency department. Well, you replicate all those services, but there's only 5 in a regional community, for example. It doesn't work like that anymore.
So what you're saying is the key to staffing up our rural hospitals is to replace them with robots.
Pretty sure I didn't say any of that.
Do the robots have God complexes as well? Is that inbuilt, or is that something they take out of the robots?
Not currently, but I understand with AI that we're on the way to that. That's exactly what we're on the way to.
No, I was stirring before, but the thing is, it's easy to move to the bush and join this wave of people that are now filling up, houses and or the people that were already in the regions and are now having families that are growing and these towns are getting bigger. It's easy to do that with all, the technology we do get to enjoy nowadays, particularly after the pandemic. A lot of people who were in the city can now work remotely from the bush. But how do we attract people who have skills that are needed in the bush to move there?
Partly that's happening naturally, as you said, as a result of 2 things. I mean, just to tell a story, in the election campaign, I ran into a fella who was a bit older than I am, but had been in a town out of Goulburn for the last 25 years. And he said the first 15 years was a story of decline. So the town elders would talk about, the last person to leave town, can you turn out the light and all that. Questions about empty shop fronts, unused land, da-da-da-da-da. And he goes, so that was the story for the first 15 years. And the last 10 years, it was in Braidwood.
Yep.
So sort of not far out of Queanbeyan and Canberra.
That's where they filmed the Ned Kelly film starring Mick Jagger.
Did they? Is that right? Yeah. Anyway, the last 10 years, he said the exact opposite, like massively sped up. Mm-hmm. So other problems, so lack of infrastructure, not enough labour, housing costs through the roof, driving away particularly young people from moving into the town. And he said, but it's funny because, 20 years ago we would have killed for these times, but now the time has hit where people want to move to our community, invest capital, grow their businesses, and we're not ready for it. So I think in some ways it's about preparing for the wave and making sure that, to use a surfing metaphor in the bush, that you're on the right side of that wave when it hits. And there's things that we can do to get that going. Like one of the main ones is in the planning department in that council, they still had the same generalising probably a bit, but they had the same person who's responsible for development applications, and they would traditionally do, 20 a year. And now there's like 5 or 6 times that number, but they've still only got the one person going through it in the same way. And
they still have to be carved off a block of land for each DA that goes through as well. So.
Yeah,
well, for their wife anyway.
Sorry, yeah. Wife's sister, I think.
If you have any knowledge of any corrupt behaviour, you've got a duty to report it. But we've got to do better, I think, in helping them get in front of it and ride this opportunity.
Mm. You mentioned housing there, and there's been obviously this ongoing debate for years and years. It's sparked up a little bit recently in terms of Sydney being the city with no grandchildren. What is happening down there? Is it as bad as everyone says?
It's worse. It's worse. On any statistic, housing in Sydney is terrible, and we're trying to do something about it, and we're hitting a lot of resistance. The major changes that we're bringing about are density. Sydney is the 830th densest city in the world, and yet by most measures we're in the top 5 when it comes to being the most expensive. Sydney and Melbourne are roughly the same size, like give or take, Greater Sydney and Greater Melbourne, yet the average house price in Sydney is $500,000 more than Melbourne. And last year, despite the fact that we've got higher median...
Melbourne's not that bad.
Yeah, well, Melbourne's about... Average house price is $900,000, which is really extremely expensive. Sydney, it's $1.5 million for a house. So unless you get money from mum or dad or grandparents or an inheritance or something, you're not going to buy in Sydney. 2 weeks ago, there was stats that said we're losing twice as many young people to Sydney as we're gaining. Twice as many between the ages of 30 and 40. And that group of people are the ones that start businesses, join communities, coach soccer and football and cricket, baseball, basketball. And if you lose them, then you lose your productive base. And I think you also lose some intangible things, which is your energy and your culture and your sense of, excitement in the city.
Do you know what you're up against here, though? Do you realise you're up against a swathe of highly, highly vocal men named Bruce and women named Diane who wear salmon polo shirts and are aged in their mid-60s to early 70s who've decided they want to live in a terrace house because they enjoy coffee and they like being near major hospitals, but they don't like the sound of live music after 9 p.m.
You've painted a vivid picture there. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yep.
Who seem to have far more political capital than any of these stupid, meaningless young people.
Well, I mean, if you don't have young people, you don't have a future. Cities around the world do it in different ways, but no one does it worse than Sydney. They're the facts. So last year we built 48,000 houses. Melbourne or Victoria built 58,000, even though we've got a larger population. So I do know what we're up against, but I do get the sense that for the first time in perhaps decades, there's like a crack in the wall, and that many people are saying, well something's got to change because the costs are just so extreme. And it doesn't mean, by the way, if you have more supply that everybody's house prices are going to go down. They're likely and largely to stay the same. And in fact, in some areas, if it's rezoned, their personal house will go up. It's just that you'll have a whole bunch of new housing on the market that will fit a particular slot, which currently we are going nowhere near catering for.
So let's talk about the terrace house here. Terrace houses are beautiful. Not much light, but the front and the back room are lovely. They are very much protected by heritage law, and so they should be. But the 40 metres above them isn't protected by heritage law. Why don't we just put a slab over the top of all of these terrace houses and go up?
Well, I mean, I don't know if we need to do that in the first case, but that might be an option. There's a ton of places where we can do two things in particular: build unit blocks, not high-rise, between medium density, as well as new terraces in communities where there are already transport links and transport lines, and then other forms of high-rise, particularly along major transport metro lines. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're focusing on in the first instance. We call them the missing middle, so that not quarter acre blocks and not high rise, but that part in the middle, which, you know, for example, large parts of suburbs like Brooklyn and many of that inner ring in Melbourne look like. We don't have them in Sydney. Yeah. We did, and for a while there, the city planners were specifically looking at growing Sydney like that.
Erskineville flats down there, the medium density with a bit of green space in between the blocks.
100%. Yeah. It works really well. People love living in and near it. They're attractive, and interestingly, they were built to a style. And one of the things that we're trialling, I'll take it back a step if you don't mind. You know, when you were saying earlier, what are you up against? I think we're up against people who are never, ever going to change and basically are more than happy for house prices to continue to go up.
The post-war Caucasian Australians never made a compromise once in their life. So, you know, they're not going to change now, especially not in their twilight years.
So some of them will never change. I think there's another group that are just next to that who are like, all I've seen in terms of density is crap. All the suburbs that apparently have been densified look terrible to me. I'm not buying it. Yeah. Now we've got
Legoland.
We've got to make a big pitch to them, and we've got to go to, because I think they're by and large reasonable people, and try and say to them, if we do this right with open space on public transport lines, the housing can look beautiful. Then you can buy in on a different version of Sydney, not the one that has been in place previously, but something that you can get behind. Because when people travel to cities, not just the big ones, like I always mention New York and London, but even Auckland is a beautiful, beautiful city. Yeah. They do density extremely well, and no one would say, God, what an urban jungle, I don't even want to travel there. In fact, people say the opposite.
Well, the one thing that we can all agree will be compromised in all of this is that quarter acre block that everyone's grandparents were able to buy and ride in 1958. That's probably not realistic in a city of 6 million plus for young families anymore.
Well, yeah, unless you've got millions and millions of dollars. Yeah.
But you're saying we need to recondition a population not only to expect a bit of noise, but we also need to recondition a population to think that maybe you have to walk up a flight of stairs or go in a lift, and maybe you need to have prams left in the lobby of your building that you now live in. And we have to develop a whole new kind of approach to housing in the sense of medium density is going to be the way that we are raising families now.
Medium density's got to be part of it, and what that would do is allow someone who has a property, they're not personally billionaires or major developers in Sydney, the opportunity to do something with their own land. And one of the ways we're trying to do that, and I think this is an innovation that could really work, is have an international design competition to have almost an off-the-shelf pattern book approach to a couple of designs. So a villa, a townhouse, a multi-unit dwelling. We want to build them first. The government architects organising the competition, and if you build to that pattern, then we'll give you an ease of approval through local government, through the state government. And so I hope people, when we finish the designs and they're released to the public, that two things happen. Firstly, builders go, well, I can build that, and the component parts of it, in theory, will be cheaper because they'll be done en masse.
But there's an aesthetic too.
But there's an aesthetic too. And if you look at terrace houses and the things that people love, or even the Art Deco buildings in the eastern suburbs, they were all built to a design.
Right. And that wasn't just a vibe.
No, it wasn't like every man for himself, what are we all going to do? It was like, I really like that. The government encouraged that particular style. Yeah. And we like uniformity. Like, we like looking at it, and we like picking up patterns, particularly in urban planning. Yeah. So anyway, this is a long way of saying there's some people who are never going to change, but if we can convince some people, oh, look, urban density can actually be bloody beautiful and fantastic for a city, and, by the way, give young people a place to live, that's what we're going for.
The other thing I think to this that doesn't seem to be spoken about enough is there were 1 million empty dwellings on census night, and obviously that was because some people were in different places, etc., etc. But research following that showed that there are basically 1 million empty dwellings around Australia. A lot of that seems to come back to the fact that we've turned what was essentially a human right into a commodity to be bought and sold and traded, and for people to appreciate their wealth.
Obviously, it's an asset more than a milestone.
It's an asset more than a place to, sleep and live, etc., etc.
Shelter,
So obviously your hands are tied a little bit at a state level in terms of what can be done on that front. But things like negative gearing and capital gains concession taxes and all that sort of stuff, capital gains tax concession, changing that stuff to peel back housing from being basically assets back to what it was intended for, which is a house, a home, somewhere for someone to live. Where do you stand on doing that and bringing about changes that basically stop it being the trading of an asset?
Yeah, look, I haven't called for it. And the main reason for that, and like it's the elephant in the room, is that the Labor Party took a big swing at it, ran a whole election campaign on it, and we got beat twice on that policy.
Federally, that was.
Federally, yeah. So I'm in the art of the possible, and we want to pursue policies that can get mass support. And I think the changes that we've announced can do that. Now, if federal Labor want to pursue that policy, that's a matter for them. And I'll have a look at it if they release it or if they change their mind. But a couple of things I've got to say is that people in my position in the past, because the density laws and the zoning changes have been so difficult because you pick a fight with a lot of communities, have gone, this is all the federal government's fault. It's either immigration or it's either preferential tax treatments around housing. Yeah. And that gets me off the hook. It gets me through interviews like this, and I can go on radio and I can do everything by just saying it's all the federal government's fault. Yeah. Problem is it doesn't change anything. Yeah. And so we bit the bullet and went, well, I could talk about all this stuff till I'm blue in the face, but at the end of the day, according to the Productivity Commission and everyone who's independently looked at it, the reason Sydney housing is so astronomically out of kilter with the economy and people's ability to pay is that there's not enough housing. And can I tell you, like this should paint the picture. We produce 6 houses per 1,000 people every 12 months. Like this is the metric they use. So 6 per 1,000 people every 12 months. Yeah. Victoria produces 8 and Queensland produces 9. Mm-hmm. And if you stack that up, that's been the case since 1992. So if you stack that up year after year after year after year after year, eventually you get these giant spreads where young people just can't afford to live anymore.
Now, you made the mistake, Premier, of using the term the art of the possible here. I want to talk about the culture that you mentioned that we are losing, with the biggest city in Australia now being a city without grandchildren. Are you aware that 1 in 4 shop fronts on Parramatta Road are vacant? Maybe more?
I don't know the number, but it wouldn't surprise me.
So this is back to the land banking thing. The value of a commercial property is tied to the yield. If no one can afford to rent that place, whether that's Crown Street or indeed Oxford Street or Parramatta Road, if no one can afford that, basically what they're saying, what I'm saying is if you want to open up a pita bread store or an ice cream store in one of these former vibrant eat streets or shopping precincts, you have to be the very best. You have to be the Messina ice cream with the red rope out the front. There's no way you're going to be able to afford it otherwise unless you are absolutely popping, and you need to do that consistently. Because otherwise you're not going to be able to afford the rent. And the reason the rent is so high and they won't lower it is because the yield is tied to the value of the property. Now, that just means it's basically a Ponzi scheme. They're willing to leave these things empty, destroy the face of the busiest city in Australia, the most populated city in Australia, and just sit on it, and just sit and wait until, I don't know, they're ready to sell or whatever they're going to do. Do you think when we talk about the art of the possible, you could go down the path of Vancouver and just put an empty properties tax on it? Because that also, if these things are filled up with shop fronts, with people who can, pay a realistic rent, then we've got more jobs for young people to live in this city without grandchildren.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have plans to do that. I'm not sure of any Australian state that's pursued it. Maybe I'm wrong. We have other interventions, like we've got a foreign investor surcharge of 8% on stamp duty and things like that to try and level up the playing field for domestic and international. That's not what you're talking about. I know Parramatta Road's not working, and there's a lot of strips and high streets that aren't working in Sydney.
We can blame Westfield, we can blame online shopping, but the fact of the matter is, people love going to the farmers markets on a Saturday. Why wouldn't they just go to the shops in a street which is right near where they live?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of genealogy of a high street I find really vexing. I don't understand why some streets pop and others just don't. And I don't understand the chemistry of it. Like in my own electorate, or in the adjacent electorate, we've got almost the exact same conditions: train station, upwardly mobile, community. A lot of young professionals, and the high street's dead. And then 2 over, you've got just the place is pumping, and it attracts a lot more people, and probably gets people from the neighbouring suburbs. I don't understand the alchemy of it. They're big interventions, those big vacancy taxes, and they have all these, consequences that I'd have to think through.
As it might get voted out by Debbie and Bruce.
That is a concern. We always have to think about that, boys. What we are doing, though, when it comes to land banking on a lot of these SEP changes is we're building in use it or lose it provisions, because I do accept that for some people, for some property developers, they make an assumption that the zoning, if let's just say it goes from 4 to 8, and then the yield on the property or the value of the property goes up on books, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to commit any capital, you've got the asset. Yeah. They work on the assumption that it'll never drop back down to 4. In fact, it could go to 10 or 12, right?
So that's a market, right?
Don't do anything with it. We're building in use it or lose it provisions in the SEP, in the proposed changes. So therefore, yes, there's an opportunity for you to build, but if you don't, it'll revert back to its original zoning, which a lot of councils are like, great, we don't want the zoning anyway, so they'll enforce it. And I'm hopeful that drives a lot of the
land banking out of it. Now, you mentioned before cities like New York and London and cities like Auckland, but when you are talking about places like New York and London, there's this assumption of economic diversity, in these places, whether it's, migrant communities of Brixton or, the rent control of Brooklyn, where firemen and nurses and teachers can live within 45 minutes of their job. What's the plan in this city without grandchildren? Mike Baird was very interested in putting blocks of dynamite underneath the social housing towers and just, creating not only a city without grandchildren, but also a city without poor people. What is your plan to kind of integrate people? Because we are, and every city is the same, heading down this path of where we're going to actually have people who've grown up without meeting anyone from the other side of the track. Even that new inner city public school that they're building just off Redfern on Cleveland Street Boys High, the new high-rise high school. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but when that was opened, the catchment of that school ended on Cleveland Street, so that the kids from Willara were not going to be at school with the poor kids across the road in the Redfern and Waterloo towers. How do you plan on giving people a little bit of a taste of what is out there in a society? What's the plan for social housing?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, we made a decision that we're going to have to be our own real estate developers on government land. There's a lot of government land in New South Wales the taxpayers own, and we're going to have to put housing on a lot of it.
What are we talking? We're talking on the back of Burke, or are we talking?
No, well, a little bit actually, and that is important. That is important for regional communities.
Yeah, I understand that, but we're talking about mass social housing.
No, we're talking in Sydney.
Yeah.
Now, as part of that, we've made a decision that 30% of it needs to be social or affordable housing within whatever we build. Now, that's 10% higher than New York. An important part of ensuring that we build up our social housing stock in the state. I think the latest figures were that there's 55,000 families or people on the social housing waiting list, so monster numbers. Mm-hmm. So that's the first way. Secondly, we've put tens of millions of dollars into the last budget. I imagine there'll be more in this coming budget for remediation on our housing stock. And we're following the same rules so that we're pursuing with our changes to density. So we've got a lot of quarter-acre blocks that were built in the inner ring of Sydney for returning diggers after the Second World War. In fact, there was Labor governments in New South Wales after the Second World War.
The soldier settlement camps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there was coalition governments in Victoria. And as a result of that, the social housing stock in New South Wales is a lot larger than it is in other states because the Labor government felt they had a social mission to build social housing. The other states didn't. The problem is that it didn't continue. It hasn't continued since then. And for the last 10 years, there's either been, well, two things have happened. Either it's been comprehensively sold off, or it's been run into the ground, so the maintenance budget's a mess. And
there's certain things. There's certain. I think if the toilet's broken, they can condemn it. You know, that was basically the case in a lot of South Sydney. So yeah, run into the ground.
And we've got, actually, the Albanese government's given us hundreds of millions of dollars which have to go exclusively into social housing. So I'm getting there. So basically, 30% of government land. We've put millions, along with the Commonwealth government, into rehabilitating our existing housing stock. We're doing a massive build-to-rent program in the New South Wales South Coast and the North Coast.
Does the government own those blocks? Build-to-rent, or is that going to be given to Harry Triggerboff?
We're partly funding them.
Yeah.
And we're doing it with social housing providers in different ones in the North Coast and the South Coast. And there's more to come. So we're not done yet.
Okay.
Now, Clancy, we've got caught in the old Sydney trap where we just start talking about property.
Oh, yeah,
of course. We never stop.
Love a dinner party in Sydney.
We probably need to move on to property prices in certain suburbs and what's moving.
How much would a Queenslander, in Brisbane, like if you go to Brisbane, one of those Queenslanders, how much would they set you back?
Yeah, some of those nice ones.
Oh, really, that cheap?
Moving on to some real issues. Mr. Albanese's Bucks. We believe you are in that group chat, Chris. What's the plan? Bali long weekend, AFL Grand Final and NRL Grand Final weekend in Bali.
I don't know. I'm not sure what his vibe would be. I mean, it'd be some kind of Australian music thing he'd do. I'm sure he'd use his chops as the Prime Minister to get. I don't know who his band.
Nick Cave, I think's potentially going.
Really?
That's what we heard. Yeah.
I heard Nick.
Well, what's the protocol about getting one of your friends to perform though? Not that he's my friend, but I presume the Prime Minister knows Nick Cave. Nick Cave would know every Australian Prime Minister intimately, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I don't think he'll perform. Maybe he'll be like feeling himself in the corner doing a little thing here and there, but he's probably not going to perform for the Bucks party. But I guess you don't get that many.
Oh, you just don't get much Aussie rock in Bali. I suppose some of those in Bali, you can go to those like walkabout bars where they just play Cold Chisel non-stop.
I've never been to. I've never been to Bali.
I actually haven't been to Indonesia.
7 times, Chris. Going for my 8th this year. You know,
good on you, mate.
As a young
Did you grow up in
Queensland,
Perth?
No, I grew up in regional Queensland.
Okay,
so,
right.
It was just part of the mining boom. So.
You try and get there every kind of 6 months or so. It's
like a FIFO. Maybe you are Balinese and you're like flying in, flying out to Australia.
Well, yeah, a bit of that. I did consider at one point just setting up there. But look, if you guys...
Did you? Is it good? Is it fun?
Oh, it's great.
You know what? A lot of people from Sydney have done that. There was like the Bondi to Byron to Bali crowd. That was a wave of all the, the original yoga crowd. But also a lot of like those surfy lads from Coogee south to Cronulla have all gone over there and set up.
Have they?
Yeah, they just surf and they build villas and have business partners over there.
Yeah. I don't know whether I'd go to Bali. Maybe.
Well, you have to for the Bucks, surely.
It's hard to get
Book
time
the
off.
weekend in.
Do you reckon he'd do his VIP jet or we'd all have to get Jetstar over?
What do they call it? Toto One?
Yeah.
No. Mind you, what was that one the other day? Qantas had to get all those Swifties to Sydney from Melbourne.
The Swifty Express.
Yeah, Swifty Express. They brought out an A380.
Did you go to Taylor Swift?
No, I missed that that hysteria. But it was interesting, right, watching that because what did she do? She did more shows in Sydney than Melbourne.
Well, look, we had over 100 tabs open in the newsroom when the tickets went on sale. We just couldn't get them.
You didn't get any?
No, we laptops, phones,
Really?
desktop computers. Yeah, we just couldn't. Well, I mean, everyone wants.
Did that take you back, that Taylor mania that took over the city? Did that take you back to your heyday? And I'm not going to, accuse you of anything here, but I imagine you were a bit of a fun boy during the Olympics, down there in Darling Harbour, dancing, whatever. That Taylor mania made it look like Sydney had a few grandchildren.
Yeah.
Made it look like a vibrant city. It's a shame it's only 4 days every 8 years.
Have to get it back every every 12 months.
Yeah. Because Brisbane's got the Olympics within reach now.
Yeah.
And you can actually feel that vibe. They're going so hard on vibrance and culture. And it's been coming for a while. They had the big sound, music, trying to pitch themselves as a bit of an Austin, Atlanta type. What's your plan to get the Cross and Darling Harbour and Oxford Street ripping again?
We do have detailed plans. So everything from UFC to annual events. The focus for us, like genuinely, is to try and get something on the calendar every year. So like if you're a UFC nut, then you know that they have the numbered event in Sydney and you can kind of save for it, prepare for it, tell your friends.
Bam Bam's going to knock out some sort of Hungarian person in front of you.
Well, that didn't happen, but the opposite happened. But anyway, that the annual events are the best ones because I'll tell you why. Because by the third year, we know what we're doing. The promoter knows what they're doing. The fan knows what they're doing, and basically it's just repeat business. And Victoria does that pretty well actually because they got AFL Grand Final, F1, blah, Australian Open. Whereas we've been going for Bayern Munich versus Sydney FC for one time. I'm not knocking that. That's probably a great event if you loved it, but it's very hard to build your event calendar around it. So we're doing things like that, trying to get to a more long distance view and have things that people can build their lives around. But can I tell you the main thing we're trying to do is I don't know if you can predict trends or what's going to be the next artist. You just need young people, and you need young people in your city, and it goes back to our original thing, getting back to property prices. Unless you have young people in your city, it's not going to be a fun city.
So imagine this. Albanese's Bucks is going to be fine because it's a bunch of people, middle-aged men who are going to Bali to,
do unspeakable things.
Get as pissed as humanly possible and listen to Nick Cave. But imagine 4 blokes. Imagine the in-betweeners, 4 dorks. Could come from England, they could come from Brisbane. They land in Sydney on a Friday afternoon. What are you telling them to do?
Well, a few things. I think the most magical thing about Sydney is the national parks that surround it. Like, it is properly unique and completely underappreciated. And because you come into Sydney and the airport's in the middle, you don't really appreciate it. If you kind of were stumbling across Sydney and you went through this thick national park and then you stumbled across this, it's almost like the lost city of Atlantis or something. Like, it's very unique, and it means that wherever you're staying, you're equidistant to a very close, pristine wilderness. Now, that is almost impossible to replicate anywhere else in the world. And so I would say to people, and I try and do it a lot with my kids, just get into a national park. And the fact that you can go bushwalking, have something to eat, see world-class sites, and then go and have a lunch on the harbour. It's unbelievable.
And then as the sun sets, you can go to a pub that haven't cleaned the carpet for 3 years and has just run off Pokemon.
Oh, yeah, that's fun.
Yeah, I guess you
go
get
to the casino too.
Well, we're working on that too.
I just
down the south coast as well. This isn't in Sydney, but down the south coast, I tell to people, right, in Merimbula, you can surf in the morning and you can ski in the afternoon on the same day. Have lunch in the middle. 2 hours from each other. There's maybe 5 places in the whole world where you could do that. It's I think we kind of skate by on how beautiful it is at first glance and not realise that even underneath the surface, it's even better.
I want to give you a shout out there for just mentioning
Don't get
Melbourne.
cynical about it, boys. It's a properly awesome city.
No, we had plenty of fun down there. Now, there is an issue though. There is an issue with Homebush. And I know he's been pantsed by Homebush multiple times for Matilda's games or whatever. Wendell,
getting out.
Yeah. What's the go there? Do you think maybe that the geographical centre of Sydney, as it's been pitched, might not be that accessible?
Well, I think the city's big enough to have a few venues. Homebush is going to be our big barn for major events. And it does do that job. Like the old Olympic Stadium, I was telling someone yesterday actually in a budget meeting, it's come in handy recently because we got 4 nights of Taylor Swift, we got most of the Matilda's games, we got all the finals for the World Cup. There's the Bledisloe. They have to come to Sydney because there's not many places that have that gigantic stadium. And that's not too dissimilar to Wembley in London, which is not any team's home ground but is their national team's home ground. Twickenham sort of does a similar thing. So we need it, and basically you need the space for a big event. I think it kind of works well with the more park changes as well, which is smaller, bit more intimate. We're trying to get more concerts and cultural events in both of them.
A couple pubs wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, look, that big bar they've got going out there seems to be doing all right. And as Clancy mentioned, I've been to a few events out there.
You can get beer out there, presumably. I'm not saying that.
You can get beer, you can do all that.
Do you reckon the Swifties went to the Hotel Concord for a slap and a couple cold jars?
Lidcombe Hotel, I think. That's where most of them were. But the transport out there is often okay. There seems to be more and more vendors popping up, particularly around the Matildas game. You know, it's good. You fly down from Queensland, you go out there, you get a taste of some food. Vendors around there, there's a great vibe. The thing that seems to happen every single time I've been out there, and it perplexes me, and I get pretty perplexed at about, I don't know, midnight, maybe after a few beers, and I'm kind of standing out the front of Homebush Station in a cattle crush moving along. There's 4 platforms at that station.
Yep.
And there only ever seems to be one train coming every 5, maybe 7, maybe 8 minutes.
Right.
With what seems like 20, 30,000 people trying to get onto the train.
Yeah.
Why is there never enough trains for events that are always forecast to have anywhere between 50, 60, 70, 80, 100,000 people?
The greatest bin fire was Luke Coombs the same night as Matildas.
Yep.
That was a fucking shit show.
Yeah, I was at the game, and then I got a call at about 11 saying it's going bad, and my driver drove me back to Homebush, and I was on the station till 1 o'clock in the morning apologising to people, and Luke Coombs fans were going, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, I guess there's 2 different demographics in Homebush that night.
And that's fantastic, and that's appreciated.
But no, look, that was a disaster, and it was not good. It was just a shocker. It was a really bad night. Oh, look, there was a signals failure. Just everything went bad at the same time. In terms of the 4 platforms and the train, I'm not an expert when trains, but there's 4 platforms, but I think there's only one track, so they'd all run into each other if.
Okay.
Yeah.
So logistically, could we look at getting a couple of tracks just outside? So for other stations around the world, it seems like they have the trains waiting there. And it's like bang, pull up, and they roll out on a timeline.
I can look at it. I mean, it's a branch line. So it goes Lidcombe, Homebush, and then back to Lidcombe.
Yeah.
And it was kind of built that way. We are investing $26 billion on that Metro West line. So that'll go from Hunter Street to Westmead. And we've got big plans for a whole bunch of housing along it. We've got an MOU with the ATC for Rose Hill. I mean, I know when cities grow, oftentimes you get kind of not settlements but outposts, and then over time you fill in the gaps, fill in between the bones. That's what we will do in that part of Sydney. And that inner west run along the Parramatta River will have a lot more people, a lot more young people. It'll have the brand new world-class metro line, and I reckon it'll be an awesome place to live. But we're not there yet. I accept that. We're not there yet.
You've given us a lot of time. Thank you. You've been very generous, especially considering we've just kind of thrown a lot of hospital passes at you. But I do want to ask, there's a lot of positivity coming out of you and a lot of plans, but what has been the toughest thing to get over the line that you believe you needed to get over the line?
The tough thing is the economy right now. Like the 2 hits of inflation and interest rates. It just puts pressure on everyone. It makes our workers unhappy because they can't pay their mortgage. Pretty good reason to be unhappy, or can't pay your rent. And it puts pressure on the government to come to the table and come up with solutions. And the whole world's going through it. So. I'd love to get through that inflation, interest rate, meeting. We've got to try and move our way through that. It's really hard, really, really hard. And I just feel for people as well, because they can't work any harder. It's not like you can add another day to the week and put in a few more hours driving an Uber. Like, you just can't do anything more. And so that drives me a bit nuts. I'm really hopeful it starts to work, inflation starts to drop, and people can keep more of the money that they earn.
The golfers seem to have a bit of an issue with you. That looked like it was a hard one to get over the line. The fact that you were going to be minimising golf courses for housing, I guess.
Chris Chavez over here.
We're not putting housing on that. That's some of the golfers' charge on us, but we're not actually doing that. So
what is the yarn? I haven't actually been tuned in. I just saw.
So we're taking there's the Moore Park Golf Course downtown Sydney. It's 18 holes. We're reducing it to 9, and we're giving the other 9 back to the community for community parkland, green space. Yep. And I was talking to Paul Keating actually about Barangaroo. Like he really drove Barangaroo. It was effectively his idea, and I was talking to him about it, and he went like, it's a place where people can go. He goes down there. Imagine Paul Keating just sitting on a rock looking at families and stuff. But anyway, he goes there and he said, you don't have to spend any money. You can turn up on a ferry. I guess you pay a nominal amount for that. And you can take your friends who've come from overseas. It doesn't cost you anything, and it's just world-class and beautiful. And I thought, well, that's true. And that's what downtown parks can give you. And, yeah, we've got a lot of them. We've got Centennial, we've got Hyde, we've got Barangaroo. But basically, if you're going to have density, you can't have enough. Because that's I think that kind of that mix of high-rise, business, commerce, and then just a beautiful park all within a really tight is what makes cities beautiful.
Well, there it is.
There it is. And just one last question, Chris, on a more maybe it's a more personal note, but I believe 2 years sober.
Yes.
You are.
Yep.
Just wanted to ask you about how that's been navigating political life. Like, obviously
Obviously, in federal parliament, you have to get as pissed as possible every single night. And mix your booze with whatever else.
And you're also, in I assume a lot of conversations with people all the time. Sometimes those conversations might be painful and would be made easier by a cold schooner or a.
Yeah, you do have to. A friend of mine did it before me. And he said you got to work on your chat game, like your social interaction, because if you're drinking, then it's like a lot easier.
Just comes out of you.
But so the Riz has gone up.
Yeah, we've got to work on that. I reckon. Well, honestly, it's been life changing for me. Major difference to everything, all parts of my life. I was leaning on it too heavily, and I was talking to my wife after I'd given it up, and she's like, "Yeah, I thought you might come to that conclusion. I didn't, She didn't want to say anything to me about it. I wish she did. But look, jokes aside, it was a massive positive difference for me. So it's not for everybody, but feel happier, feel more energetic. I used to wake up in the morning and dread the day.
Yeah.
It'd kind of lift by about 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
But first thing in the morning, I'd be like, what have I got on today? I'm going to get belted here and here and here and here. And now I wake up and I'm not euphoric or anything like that. I'm just ready to go. And for me, I can't go back. For other people, it'd be different. I don't regret any of my drinking days. Like, I had the best times. I had so many great memories, and I had experiences that I probably wouldn't have had if I didn't drink. Because you just wouldn't be in the vibe, I guess. So I don't regret it. I'm not saying it was terrible or I did bad things or anything like that. But for me right now, it's just life changing.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of actually, to be fair, we kind of expect it of a premier to just not be on the piss.
Yeah.
That's another, it was like when ScoMo went on holidays, everyone was like, we didn't think you were allowed to, man. Like, not only do we not think you deserve one, we don't think you're allowed one. Like, you're in charge of things. So it's good. That's good to hear, mate. Congratulations.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. And I talk about it, and people say, just shut up about it. You're evangelising too much. So maybe it's not for everyone, but for me.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Thanks,
and,
boys.
This has been an early interview, which you could have only done fresh and sober.
Are you guys fresh?
Yeah, feeling a little bit fresh in the scheme of things.
What time do you get up in the morning?
Ice bath guy over here. So he's up at 5 a.m.
Yeah, I'm down.
Do you really do an ice bath?
Plunge.
Yeah, cold plunge. Unfortunately, I've been told I can't keep calling them ice baths. They don't meet the technical level of an ice bath.
What's his name? Wim Hof.
So I'm not at that. I'm at the cold plunge.
One of my mates is a Wim Hof guy, and on our group chat there's constant photos of Wim Hof and cold plunges, and
that sounds like a Wim Hof guy behavior.
He posts it. He posts all these. No one's interested, but he posts a lot of him coming out of ice baths. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
with the shakes and
The group chat was called Wim Hof for a while.
Wim Hof.
Yeah. Has anyone else taken it up? Have you taken up the ice baths?
No. Giving up alcohol's enough. Sort of.
Yeah,
for
that's
me.
enough.
I feel I've done my
system.
bit. I've done my bit for humanity. I'm not going to keep. Yeah.
Well,
I'll get into CrossFit next.
Oh, yeah, CrossFit.
Give up grog.
Go
Get
to
into
Jim
CrossFit.
Saunas as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Jim Chalmers on the battle ropes. Thank you for joining us. We'll let you go.
Thanks, boys.
Thanks, Chris.